Hello, everyone, and on behalf of the Crime Writers Association, welcome to Steve Cavanagh and Friends Pick Up a Page Turner for National Crime Reading Month, once again in partnership with the Reading Agency. I'm Anthony Johnston. I'm a former vice chair of the CWA and author of the Dog Sitter Detective Mysteries, but I am not taking part in tonight's event. Instead, I am here to do the technical wrangling behind the scenes and to remind you all that this is just one of the many events taking place across the UK and Ireland and online this month as part of National Crime Reading Month. You can find more events online and near you at crimereading.com. That's crimereading.com. And if you happen to be an event organizer, that is the same place to go and tell us about your event so we can help promote it. National Crime Reading Month culminates in the CWA Daggers ceremony in London on July 6th. Tickets for that are still on sale, but there are very few left. So if you want to snatch one up, go to our website at thecwa.co.uk. All right, that is enough from me. I will be back at the end, but for now, I'm going to pass you over to a man who has a CWA dagger on his shelf and is also one of our ambassadors for National Crime Reading Month, Steve Cavanagh. Steve, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Everyone, big welcome to you, and I'm sure I want to join all of you in thanking Anthony for helping us set all this up. He doesn't just do this technical stuff. Anthony is also a brilliant writer. The Dog Sitting Detective is one of his new series. The last book of Anthony's I read was The Patois Network, which I heartily recommend. He has also written some of my favorite video games as well. So if you're buying a book this evening, do also consider Anthony there and his wonderful novels, if you're doing that. Now, there are various people I think who are appearing in front of me, and I'm going to introduce them one by one very briefly. They're all starting to appear. So we'll start first of all. I think everyone's coming in. Yes, I think we're all good. I think we're all here. So you're very welcome to this event. And as Anthony said, it's part of the CWA National Crime Reading Month of June. And joining us tonight, we have Kia Abdullah, who is the best-selling, award-winning author of 4 novels now, I believe. Is that right, Kia?
That's right, yes, 4.
Brilliant. And those books include Take It Back and Those People Next Door, which sounds fantastic. She's also been nominated for the CWA Gold Dagger. So you're very welcome this evening, Kia. Are you keeping well?
Thank you, Steve. Sadly, I don't have a dagger on my mantelpiece, but maybe one day.
Well, I'm sure you will. It's a very nice mantelpiece. That's a lovely fireplace you have there.
Thank you.
Really nice.
I have noticed that I'm kind of disappearing into it, which I didn't notice until now. So,
oh no, you're okay. We can see you. We can see you. Don't worry. Next, we have Janice Hallett. Hi, Janice.
Hello, Steve. Hi. Thank you for having me. I do actually have a dagger, but it's packed away because we've been doing some decorating here. And although you can't see it, it is actually a disaster zone, this room. So my dagger is safely packed away.
Okay. So. Well, I see your British Book Awards trophy there on display.
My nibby came in after the packing up went on. So that's out. So it's it's a bit awkward, but that's the way it is. So I'm very proud of my dagger.
I'm sure you are. And why wouldn't you be? And I hope you're doing well. Just for people who may not know, Janice is the best-selling and award-winning, as you can see, trophies on display, author of such books as The Appeal, The Twyford Code, and I think your latest book is The Alperton Angels. Is that right?
The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels. That's right.
Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels. There you are. Well, you're very welcome, Janice.
Thank you.
And next we have Ruth Ware, who is the #1 international best-selling author of a number of fantastic books, including In a Dark, Dark Wood, The It Girl, and her latest release. Well, it's not out just yet.
No, it's not out in the UK. No, not quite.
0 days.
Beginning of July, yes. Over here by doing my good book promo.
Oh, look at that. Brilliant.
I've just realised I didn't have my glasses on and I was freaking myself out when my face came up on the screen because I was like, why do I look so weird? And then I was like, it's because I'm not wearing glasses. I'm not used to seeing myself without glasses. So yeah, if I look weird, that's why.
Well, no, you don't look weird at all. If you want to go and get your glasses, we can pause for a moment.
I can see you all. I don't need them for very short range things. I'm just not used to seeing myself out in public without them is the problem. But, I'm sure everyone else will be fine with it.
I'm sure we'll muddle through. We'll be fine. I am personally disappointed, but we can get over that, Ruth. You'll be fine. And also we have joining us Mr. Abir Mukherjee, who is the award-winning author of the fantastic Wyndham and Banerjee series.
Hey, Steve.
Are you doing all right?
Doing? Can I just say something at this point? I've just realised that
Yes.
Ruth Ware, without her glasses, is actually Supergirl.
It's true.
We did not realise it was the glasses. Yeah. There you are, ladies and gentlemen. Bombshell already.
Yeah.
World exclusive for you.
Brilliant. Do you have is the cape underneath that blanket? Is it?
Yeah, it actually is. It's here. That's for Kate.
Fantastic. Well, folks, thanks very much for joining us. I should say, if you have questions for us, please do use the Q&A box. Feel free to chat and make funny comments or any comments you like in the chat. If you have a question for us, we want to see your question. We can only see that in the Q&A box, which Anthony will be monitoring fiercely. So you're all very welcome. I have a few questions, but this all may descend into a bit of a chat or a disaster, depending on how things go. But I wanted to start off because this is National Crime Reading Month, and I wanted to kind of focus a wee bit on reading, first of all, and what we all started off reading and how we sort of came to crime and what books, what was our first entry into crime and the crime books that started us off, the love of this genre. So, Kia, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I mean, I was always a big reader, and I started off with the typical kind of Judy Blumes and so on. And when I got a bit older, I think I picked up possibly The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson, which was and still remains one of my favorite crime novels. And it was just so dark and creepy, and his voice was just so extraordinary. And that really got me into reading crime. And then I went through the whole gamut, from, I remember Sleepyhead, Mark Billingham, and lots of police procedurals. And then obviously we got the kind of domestic suspense boom of around Gone Girl. And I think that was another step change in crime fiction. And so I kind of gobble up anything that's set in the home and that's quite dark, but I'm always drawn to something with a kind of really strong voice. And I think Gone Girl certainly falls into that vein.
Absolutely. That's kind of I think more and more, that's more of a seminal book, really, in this genre now.
Yeah, I kind of love that she wrote it and was like, I'm done, I've written this perfect piece of work and now I'm going to F off and enjoy my millions. And in a way, that's the dream. I'm sure she's still writing fiction, but in terms of publishing, it was kind of the ne plus ultra of crime fiction, and now she's done.
Well, no, she does have another book coming. I don't know when, but I was listening to her chat with Dennis Lehane, maybe even last year, and there is another book in the way, which I'm excited about. But you can imagine the pressure. Imagine having to follow Gone Girl. That would be... Yeah.
I feel like, I suppose Donna Tartt takes about 10 years to write a book, and she's about 3 years overdue now. I think it's been 13 years since the last one. So I think Gillian Flynn can take her time. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I love how we're talking about them all as if they're like, old faithful geezers. Like, she blows about once every 10 years. She's slightly overdue, so it could be a big one.
What about you, Ruth?
I suppose, the first kind of crime I read was kind of all the sort of golden age stuff. I've always been a huge reader, and as a kid, I read absolutely anything. I was the kind of child who was, there at the breakfast table reading the side of the cereal packet because my mum wouldn't allow us to have books at the table, and that was the closest thing I could read. So, everything from, Judy Blume to, Nancy Drew novels to Famous Five to like way more unsuitable stuff than that. I think I read Jilly Cooper and Virginia Andrews at far too young an age and probably, screwed myself up irredeemably. But yeah, as far as crime went, I think it was sort of really golden age stuff for quite a while for me, partly because I'm actually quite a scaredy cat when it comes to other people's writing. I find reading sort of really tough, scary crime, like just way out of my comfort zone, although I am getting better as I get older. But I think... as Kia was saying, like, the sort of the psychological thriller boom of, I guess it would have been sort of the mid to sort of early 2000s, I think it just showed what a kind of playful genre crime can be. You know, it can be very serious. It can tackle like really pressing issues, but it can also be incredibly creative with the form, with the way that it plays with the reader's expectations, with the way that it, you know, sets up a puzzle and invites us to solve it. Something that Janice's books do brilliantly, and. Yeah, I think, you know, it can do all of that within the same book often, which is what's so brilliant about us as a genre.
Well, absolutely. It's so versatile. It's one of the big strengths of the genre. Abir, what about you? What did you start off reading? How did you find reading crime?
Well, being from Glasgow, my entry to crime is different from my entry to crime reading. Quite significantly. I won't tell you which one came first. I'm pretty sure you can guess. But, you know, I probably came to crime through TV to start with. So, you know, things like Poirot was probably my gateway into crime fiction. In terms of books, the one that stands out is Gorky Park by Martin Cruz Smith, which I must have read when I was about 14 or 15. And for me, that book, it sort of had it all because I was a wee bit nerdy. I was into politics, but there was this great story wrapped around in this political thriller. And you had this sardonic detective, this good guy upholding this really bad system. And I loved it. It sort of spoke to me in a way that Poirot didn't quite. So yeah, that was my gateway drug, shall we say, into crime fiction, as opposed to any other gateway drugs into other areas, shall we say.
Excellent. And Janice, what was your marijuana book of choice? Gateway book?
Well, for me, I was a voracious reader as a child as well, but we had no books in the house. So my reading was limited to what I could find at the jumble sale. So it was basically what people were throwing out in the 1970s, which was mainly Enid Blyton. So I grew up on the famous five. I think that gave me a foundation of a kind of a love for the underdog, the unusual detective, the non-police detective, if you like. I think that's kind of put that into my DNA. I'm afraid as I got older, though, I did go through a time where I read pony books, for which I apologise now.
I think there's nothing wrong with that.
I didn't come back to crime till my late teens and 20s, when my favourite books then were more true crime and the reality of crime. And like Abir, my crime fiction was largely on film and on TV. I mean, the greatest crime fiction film of all time for me is Seven. That's just amazing. Amazing film. But yeah, I loved all the Christies on film. So film until I started writing crime myself. And I've done a massive catch up over the last 3 or 4 years, reading everything. And I'm just thrilled to be in this genre with such a sort of a diversity of writers, all sorts of forms, all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of stories coming out. It's wonderful.
Brilliant. So what have you read since you've found crime that you've really enjoyed?
Oh my goodness, so much stuff. I've pretty much enjoyed everything. I can read books and enjoy them for what they are, rather than think I don't like this type of book or I'm not enjoying this. I think I read with a writer's mind now, and I can see what's behind each book and what the intention is and the themes, as well as the book itself. I've loved series. I love Karen Slaughter. I love Ellie Griffiths. I love all the I love reading debuts as well. People's first book to me is really interesting. How they start writing and what they write when they begin is really wonderful. It's very different to what they write 8-9 books down the line, and that's been fascinating to me too, to see how a writer has developed over their career and over their life, because it's not just a career. We grow and develop as people as we write, and that's a fascinating thing to see too. So I've loved the journey.
What about you, Steve? What about you? Yeah.
I sort of read a lot of Roald Dahl when I was growing up. Loved Roald Dahl books. and I love Lord of the Rings, which I reread used to reread it every Christmas. And then I found my way into fantasy novels through that. And then my mum gave me Silence of the Lambs when I was probably 12, I think. And
wow, that's ballsy.
Yeah. I know, but I grew up in Belfast during the Troubles. Silence of the Lambs is like
that was escapism.
It's just total escapism. It's almost cozy.
So you were reading Lord of the Rings. Well, that's 1,000 pages.
Yeah, and I love it. And my wife bought me, or somebody bought me. I have a very special edition of it over there. I love it.
Wow.
And it can be quite scary too, that book. There's lots of scary stuff in there. It's not a children's book. No,
neither Silence of the Lambs.
Not really. There might be one or two very interesting booksellers who might slip it into the children's section every now and again. But Jilly Cooper is, possibly worse.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not casting any stones here. I will point out it wasn't my mum that gave me Jilly Cooper, Steve. That's all I'm saying.
Right, well, fair enough. I would want if your mum gave you Jilly Cooper at that age. Yeah, I'd be phoning Childline. I loved it and I found my way in. But interesting, Janice, you were saying there about debuts. I think with a debut novel, it contains you're kind of throwing the kitchen sink at everything. And everything that you can be possibly as a writer is in that first book. And some things might stay and some things might go, but it has the sort of it's kind of like the big sort of salad bar of what you can be, and you pick little things out of that going forward. But what about yourself, Kay? What are you reading at the moment that you really enjoyed?
Oh God, so much. So I'm always drawn to novels that, I mean, one of the best things about crime is that it's, and Abir said this before, it's a great vehicle for social commentary. And so I think a really great crime novel has to have all those ingredients, plot, character, pace, and so on. But for me, what elevates a crime novel to great is when it says something about the world. And so I didn't read it recently, I think maybe last year, but one of the novels that really stuck with me was The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker. And it starts off with a character called Chrissy. I think she's 8. And it starts off with the line saying, "Today I killed a boy." And, that sounds quite pulpy, but it's actually a really beautiful novel. And it gets into things like child poverty and the lasting effects that it has on somebody's psyche. And essentially this child killer grows up to have a child of her own and looks at that kind of dichotomy of the way she was brought up versus the way she acts as a mother. And I just think crime writing and crime novels can be so profound and grapple with these massive kind of grand themes. And as we all probably know, the literary establishment can sometimes look down on genre fiction, particularly crime. But I think something like The First Day of Spring or Katrina Ward's The Last House on Needless Street show not just the themes, but how beautiful the writing can be. And so those are two novels that have kind of stuck out with me over the last few years.
Well, is that something that, it's obviously that's important to you, finding really important social issues in a novel, and that maybe makes it resonate more with you. But is that something you bring into your own writing? I'm thinking of your latest book, which has sure. social issues.
Yeah, so Those People Next Door was kind of a reaction to, well, in a way, BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement in America, and then Brexit and the fallout that we were seeing in the UK. And so it focuses on a teacher who moves to a kind of safe suburban area on the outskirts of London. But soon after arriving, she spots her next door neighbour uprooting the anti-racist banner that's in her plant pot. And initially, she doesn't say anything because her family are new there and she just doesn't want to cause a fuss. So she takes it inside and puts the banner in her window instead. But the next morning she wakes up to find her window smeared with paint. And this time she does confront him and things begin to escalate between the two families. And that for me was a real jumping off point. And I feel like things like that can lend themselves to plot, but also, as you say, these kind of deeper themes that I'm really interested in and to me elevate a good crime novel to a great crime novel.
Brilliant. Abir, anything you've been reading recently?
What I'm reading right now is 1989 by the one and only Val McDermid, of course, which is the follow-up to her previous book, which I think came out last year, 1979, which is a new series featuring her lady reporter, Ali Burns. And I think there's quite a bit of, because Val was a journalist, and this book is set in Manchester. And for me, it's really interesting to work out what bits are autobiographical and which bits may be fictional. But it's a really good read, and I'm getting into that. It's also a nostalgia trip because 89, I am old enough to remember 89 very well. But there's so much that you forget, and she picks up little nuggets, and you're like, oh yeah, that did happen. Before that, I just finished rereading one of my favorite crime books, which is The City and the City by China Miéville. I don't know if anyone's read that. To me, I would love to be able to write a book like that. It's about a murder which is set in two cities which exist in the same place at the same time, and the citizens of each city have to unsee the residents of the other city, and it's a really clever book. It's a crime novel, but it's so much more. And he creates this amazing world. I think there was a BBC series. I think it was a 4-part drama series on it. But if you ever get the chance, please do watch it or read it. It's a tough book to read. The style is very sort of pared back. It's almost Kafkaesque in some ways. But, I would love to be able to write a book like The City and the City. It's mind-blowing.
It really is mind-blowing. And I don't pretend to have understood all of it, I have to say. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. Some time ago, I read that. That's quite a while, that one.
Oh, absolutely. This was a rereading. And there's a couple of books that I read whenever I feel like I need to sort of expand my mind. If you see what I mean. And it's funny, each time I read that book, it sort of sets off things in my own head of what is possible with the novel. From this latest rereading, it's given me an idea for a novel that I might want to write. But my problem is, and this is something Ruth once told me, it's a cathedral in my head and it's a shed when I write it down.
Can I point out, I didn't say that about Abir's writing, very much to the contrary. I was talking about my own experience, and I was quoting Sadie Jones, the writer. So, plagiarized her.
Well, you must be reading a lot these days, Ruth. Anything that jumps out for you?
Oh, I've had a cracking reading year. Of course, it's always that thing. Does everyone else find this? Because you're a writer, people always say to you, "Oh, what should I read? What are you reading?" And instantly, your mind goes completely blank. Right. But yeah, some of the books I've read this year, really love The Close, Jane Casey's Maeve series, which is set in a heat wave, so that might be something for us all to read this weekend, Steve, if your weather predictions are correct. What else? I recently read a cracking debut novel by a new writer called Yomi Adegoke. It's called The List, and it's sort of, I don't know if it's exactly crime, it's sort of crime adjacent, but it's kind of like a successor to sort of all the Me Too novels that we've had recently. But actually, I'm sort of between books at the moment in terms of writing, and I often try to sort of do a little kind of palate cleanser by reading something that's definitely not crime, something that I'm not blurbing, something that I'm not reading for work. And so I picked up Hugh Howey's Wool, the sci-fi novel.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just being adapted for TV. And like many people, I prefer to read a book before I watch the adaptation. So I thought, well, I'll read it first. Only to find it's actually, the beginning half at least, is a really cracking whodunit. And I think as a crime writer, that's one of the things I love, like, welcoming other people into the genre and saying, you're crime too. And that book definitely starts out as a procedural. It's got, a sheriff who's trying to solve a crime. So.
Yeah, there's Jackie Rogers in the comments says Wool is a murder mystery. So there you are.
Yeah.
And there's a note from Anthony. The adaptation of Wool is called Silo, and I think that might be on Apple.
Sounds plausible. Yeah.
There you go.
Can I just say, going back to Ruth's point about being asked for recommendations, I was in the pub on Tuesday night and I was asked that question. And I did say The Accomplice by Steve Cavanagh, because they said, look, I want something written by a really handsome man.
That you see?
And that's what sprang to mind, mate.
Plus, I also have to give you £5 every time you do that.
That's good. I'm happy with that.
Fortune. Janice, anything you've read recently, true crime that you would recommend?
Well, funny you should mention true crime, because the book that I've read the most recently is still on my desk, All the Little Liars by Victoria Selman. I think it's due out in August. It's a follow-up to her Truly, Darkly, Deeply, which I also loved. This too is fabulous. And that link between true crime and crime fiction, I think, is very evident in Victoria Selman's work, because she's very inspired, as I am, by actual crime. And she brings a humanity to it. I mean, serial killers, we all read and watch a lot about serial killers, and you can do that a lot, but a crime novelist can really bring the whole situation to life and really get to the heart of the humanity of a situation. And I would recommend Victoria Selman's All the Little Liars for that, because that's very inspired by some real life cases. And all I can say is read it when it comes out, because it is very good. But I don't want to give any spoilers by actually starting to explain what it's about.
No spoilers here. I have that one to read. That's on my list. That's great. So I wanted to ask you as well, a lot of people in these events, talk about how they get started. I thought I wouldn't ask that. I thought we'd ask how we keep going.
Great question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic is the answer there. Yeah. But I think that's not talked about very much, is that, once you do get published, and like we've all published a handful of books now, some more than others, and we're, the question is, what inspires you? I mean, Kia was saying that she's obviously inspired by social issues, and the reading is focused that way. Janice has true crime as well. I mean, what inspires you to write? Is it books that you're reading, or do you have a career plan? Do you go for story first, or Abir, you kick us off, because I know a lot of your books focus on historical aspects and colonialism and all those fascinating things. But what inspires you?
Yeah, essentially, I write about whatever's making me angry at any particular time. In that sense, it's a form of therapy for me, because I'm too stingy to get proper therapy. So, if there's something bothering me, I will write about it. So, as you say, my books are historical, but a lot of the time they're allegorical as well. So my fourth book, Death in the East, I wrote just after Brexit. And there are some allegories between what happened in this country in 1905 and, in the way that Jewish immigrants were being treated compared to what we were seeing just after Brexit. And so I wanted to write about that. My new book, which is going to come out next year, which is finally finished, and you'll all get a copy of it very soon to tell me it's rubbish or it's still a shed.
I want some of my £5 notes back, so send it to me.
But that's set in America next year, so it's set before the next presidential election. But again, it's dealing with things that upset me, such as the rise of populism, polarization of society, all of these factors. Yeah, so for me, keeping going is firstly about writing about stuff that angers me, but also, why wouldn't you keep going? It is the best job in the world, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was an accountant for 20 years.
Why on earth keep going? Well, what drives you? What motivates you? I suppose it would be a better question.
No, it was a good question. I was being facetious.
I know you were. You have form for that.
Yes.
Who else wants to jump in on this?
I will. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked it before. And I've just been thinking there, what does drive me? What does motivate me to keep going and to sit down at my desk and write every single morning? I think I'm on a kind of journey, a creative journey. And I like the exploring and experimenting aspect of writing, particularly starting a new idea. Starting a new book really excites me. I mean, there's a slog in the middle somewhere because it then excites me again at the end. But yeah, there's something to do with the thrill of that and the danger of it. And apart from that, just in the stories, I'm fascinated by humans and their interactions with each other. And I'm always observing people and how they interact. So I want to put what I observe on the page and explore it and get to the bottom of why people do what they do. And especially when they do things I don't understand or I wouldn't do myself. So I always want to get to the bottom of that. So I think that's behind my getting up every morning and sitting at my desk somewhere. But I think that's an ongoing question. I'm going to ask myself that more often.
There you are. Fantastic. Ruth, what about you? Do you have a career plan?
Oh, I wish. When you said that, I did a little kind of sort of wince just at the thought of being that grown up. No, I don't. And I think, like Abir, my writing is very much a form of therapy for me. But from a different kind of perspective, I do sometimes write about things that make me feel angry, but more often I write about things that make me feel anxious, I think, things that make me sort of wake up feeling cold in the night or worried or, phobias that I have. And that, that really started right from my first book, In a Dark, Dark Wood, which is about the phobia that I think lots of us have, that, we might have done something wrong and we've just we can't quite think what it is, but we have that sort of vague looming sense of guilt that maybe we did something and we just, it was 20 years ago and we've forgotten. And it's, gone all the way. It's the one thread that's sort of carried on all the way through to The It Girl, which is about the sort of the notion of someone who has given really crucial evidence in a court case. My main character, Hannah, is the person who's responsible for convicting the murderer of her roommate at university. And then 10 years later, she realizes that possibly she made a mistake, that, she gave honest evidence, but that she didn't fully understand what she saw, that she jumped to conclusions, which is, a bit of a nightmare of mine. And then my book that's coming out in July is about someone who's suspected of the murder of her husband. And the idea of, I think as writers, crime writers particularly, we sort of cast red herrings around with gay abandon and throw suspicion onto people in really very cruel ways. But, for me, the idea of being suspected of a crime that I hadn't committed, particularly if you were kind of bereaved at the same time, it's just like the worst kind of gut-wrenching what if, and what if you had to prove your innocence of, the person that you love most in the world. So yeah, it's all ultimately about my own sort of, roiling insecurities. But I think too, what you were saying, Steve, about everything being in your first novel, that's true, but it's also true in a kind of really irritating way, in that, I find myself, I'm writing my 9th book now, thinking, oh, that would be a good idea. And then thinking, oh, damn it, I did that in book 3, or I've already done that in book 2. But I think the silver lining of that is that it makes you more creative as a writer, because often the first thing that your imagination goes to is the obvious thing. And actually, if you can force yourself to dig a little bit deeper to the slightly less obvious thing, that can make for a more interesting book.
Absolutely. And Kia, what about you?
If I'm going to be completely honest, I think ego keeps me going in no small part. I think, I'd love to hit the Sunday Times bestseller list one day. I've hit various other lists, but as we all know, like the Sunday Times is the list. And I joke sometimes that if I ever did hit it, when I hit it, positive mental attitude, I'd retire. I'd be like, tick, done. But the reality is, look, I love fiction. I love writing. And as Abir says, it's the best job in the world. I worked in tech for 3 years after graduation. And although I was earning a lot more money than I have for many years as a writer, it was soulless in comparison. And so I think our jobs have soul. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but that soul and ego, I guess, are my answers. That's what keeps me going.
I think that's great for you to say that, because, I like that writers have ambition. and want to get better and want to write better books and want to get more known and gather more readers. I think that's great. Do you do anything with your craft? Is one I wanted to ask as well. And we're going to get questions probably in about 5 minutes, folks. So load up those questions. But I wanted to ask, do you do anything to help improve your craft? Other than perhaps, or maybe it could be seeking out different writers to read, or do you do anything like that? Who wants to come in on that?
I will start by setting the bar very low and saying no. I don't.
That's fine. You don't need to, Ruth Ware.
I always feel a bit guilty because, everybody else has like go-to books that they've read and they can quote from, all these sort of screenwriting books and novel writing books. And I've never really read a how to write book. I've never taken a creative writing class. And it's one of the things that makes me feel very imposterish about teaching, because I think, well, I've never been taught, so I don't know how to do it. But I think what I do, and actually I sort of did it by accident a couple of years ago when I took a year off for lockdown, basically because I just couldn't write, is I just go and refill the well, just experience the world, look at all the weirdnesses, listen to people's conversations, and taking a break. I think if you've been writing really hard, can be one of the most creatively enriching things that you can do.
Brilliant answer. What about the rest of you folks? Anything else?
Clearly, you can all do better than me because I started right at the bottom.
No, that's a great answer.
Well, I often say, really, the only skill you need to be a writer is to be a reader. And so I think you get an inherent idea of structure. And I have read a lot of books on craft and structure, and Stealing Hollywood by Alexander Sokolov was one of them. And I remember, I think I read it after book 3. And I wrote this, massive diagram of, Act 1, Act 2B, Act 2C, Act 3. And I realized that Take It Back, my debut, actually fit that structure without me having sat down and planned that structure. And so I think often when you consume a lot of stories, whether that's film or books, novels, you just get an inherent idea of what a story should be. One book I really found useful in building character and getting the kind of texture into my writing was The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. And he talks about the way, and he does get quite scientific, he talks about the way our eyes process information in the world and how it kind of takes snapshots. And that's why in moments of high pressure, our brain processes increase. And so we're processing things with far more detail than we might normally. And he talks about Jurassic Park and that wonderful scene where, we see the water shaking and we see her eyes go large and we hear things. And he says, try to recreate that in your writing, kind of pack moments of high tension with lots of detail. And so certain books have created a bit of a kind of step change in my writing. And so I think working on craft is useful, but really the most important thing is to read a lot.
I mean, I would sort of agree with both of those. If I have a fear, it's of reading books about structure. I've never read them because I'm scared it'll make me write in a certain way. What I find is what Kia said, it's about reading. For me, I don't know, I find it very difficult now to read for pleasure. So, if I'm reading crime fiction, I'm analysing far too often rather than just enjoying. And what I find I get enjoyment from now is language. So I love Denise Mina, who I think is just amazing. The way that she can describe human emotion in such, a paucity of words is amazing. So I like to read and learn from writers who are at the top of their game. Martin Amis, who died recently, London Fields is a phenomenal crime novel, not in terms of plot, but just in terms of the way the language used and the structure. So that's what I try and learn from. I remember reading London Fields the first time and then writing a chapter of whatever book I was writing in that style. And I thought, this is a brilliant chapter. But then the next chapter, I forgot all about it and just went back to writing the way I do. I hope that, some of these sorts of nuggets that we learn from our betters do rub off. I'm not sure though, but that's it. I mean, I've never done a class. I've never done a course. I've never done a degree in any of these things. And I'm scared of reading too many sort of textbooks about it.
For me, although I haven't studied novel writing at all, I did do a degree in screenwriting with a view to taking up screenwriting. So I did an MA at Royal Holloway, 2006 to 2008, a long time ago. And I learned a lot about story structure in a kind of generic way. Well, it was focused on screenwriting, but what I learned there has served me so well, I think, as a novelist. I mean, it's no different. Stories are structured very similarly across film and novels. So I kind of learned everything there. I mean, I'm kind of wary of reading a how-to book because I fear I may lose whatever kind of raw energy that I have that may not be correct, but that might be serving my particular style well. So I think at this stage, I'm a bit wary of reading anything instructive about novel writing.
I need to make one more point. As you know, Steve, I was struggling writing this thriller of mine that's coming out next year. And then I just happened to pick up your last book. And in a similar way, it sort of answered a lot of questions for me. I realized that to write a thriller...
You realize this book I'm writing is not as bad as this crap.
No.
Published.
What happened was, having written historical crime novels for the last 5 years, I realized that it's a very different process to write a thriller. And you taught me that you have to hit somebody in the face with a frying pan every couple of chapters.
Yeah.
And I learned, and I was sitting there, I was thinking, wow. And, you never take the easy option. And that was what I learned. And I learned it, and I hopefully have applied it to what I'm writing. So again, it's learning from others who do it best, I suppose.
Oh, no, not at all. You've been teasing me about this book. I want to read this book of yours.
But what about you, Steve? I'm interested in your view on the craft question.
I think it's up to the individual writer, whatever you get inspired by or whatever you want to do. Me, I am always with the slight imposter syndrome. So I read loads of stuff about how to write a book because there might just be one little magic nugget in there, which would be great and inspire you to do something. So I've just recently, there's a brilliant book by Chuck Palahniuk on writing, which I recommend, called After This, Everything Was Different, or something like that. It's a very weird title. But I learned lots of stuff like that, which I've used in books about, for example, how to use sound in a novel, and various different ways of doing that. And I never would have thought to do that in a book unless I'd read Chuck. I hadn't read Chuck's book. Stephen King's on writing, but I do all the master classes as well online. I've done them all, and I've taken something from each of them. But you don't have to do any of that, and it may well be I've taken something and it's sent me off on a wrong path somewhere. But I like learning. I've always done that, even when I was a lawyer. I like learning new things. So that's just me. So there you are, folks. I wonder, do we have any questions? Is Mr. Johnson going to come back to us? I wonder. And
there's lots of questions.
Down there in the Q&A.
I can do. I'm here. We have lots of questions. Yeah, we have 17 questions in so far. A couple of them are duplicates, but one of the most interesting, I think, and pertinent to what you've been talking about is actually from an anonymous attendee. And they say, did you have anxiety when writing your first novel about putting it out there and friends and family, or just people finding out? And how did you get past that anxiety?
Yes. I would say yes a lot. I won't answer for everyone, but I wrote for years and years and years without ever trying to get published, for exactly that reason, really. And I had a couple of really close friends who I would let read my things. But there was always that fear of, what if someone reads it and thinks it's stupid? And, what if I send it out to agents and everyone hates it? And so I just kept writing and kept putting it under the bed. And it was only when I had kids, I had 2 really small kids. And I didn't have time for anything. I had a really demanding job. I had 2 small babies under 3. I was just, just didn't have an hour to wash my hair, let alone write novels. And I thought, if I don't find a way to keep this in my life, I'm going to lose it. So that was what pushed me to start writing for publication and subbing to agents. But I think Stephen King has a really good way of putting it. The way he phrases it is you have to write the first draft with the door shut and the second draft with the door open. And that's really the only way I can get the courage up to write a book, is to pretend that no one is going to read it apart from me. And when I get to the end of it, that's the point at which I allow myself to say, maybe my agent will see this, and maybe my editor will see it, and maybe my mother-in-law will read it, and it sort of kind of expands from there. I'd love to know what the others think, though.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I didn't tell my partner I was writing a novel, which took me a year to write, The Appeal. And then it was pretty much another year before, I had the publishing deal for it. And I didn't tell him until it was almost about to be published.
What did you think you were doing? He must have thought you were having an affair or something.
Well, he knew I was writing. I've been writing for a long time and not getting anywhere. And I was so in that rut that people had stopped asking me, because I was just a writer that never had anything made, because I was screenwriting as far as anyone knew. So yeah, I didn't tell him I'd switched to novels until the Appeal was about to come out. But I think that was to protect him and my other friends and family from the rejection that I was getting on a daily basis. And, big rejection. If you spend a year writing a novel and that's then rejected, that's a big rejection. And I wanted to protect everybody else from that and that disappointment, because I was fine with it. I'd come to terms with it by then. I've been doing it for so long and had so much rejection. But yeah, so it was amazing to tell him finally that I was going to get something published. It was surreal.
Steve, isn't that
when you got your
story?
When you got the deal, did you not tell him, oh, I've got a publishing deal? It was almost coming out, and then you told him.
Yeah, I still didn't think it would ever be public. I thought, I couldn't get my head around the fact that it would ever appear until things like front covers were coming through on the email for me to look at, and publishing, the blurb was coming through and promotional material. And I thought, I am going to have to tell him. I am going to have to tell my friends that this is coming out.
I almost wish you had sort of just waited until it was in the bookshops and then just like,
taking him past the bookshop with it in the window would have been wonderful, wouldn't it?
What's that in the window?
Yeah, I was just saying, Steve, isn't that similar to your story?
Yes, it is. It is. I started writing. I had Eddie Flynn pretty much almost finished before I told Tracy I've written a book, and she read it. She thought, yes, that's not bad. I didn't tell her because I'd written like a page of something before, and before I started writing the defense, and showed it to her and said, what do you think of this? I'm thinking of writing. And Tracy read it and said, that's shite. I thought, at least I you know what?
I can't imagine that.
But I'm so thankful for that. I can't tell you how valuable that is to me, and how valuable Tracy is to me in general. But Tracy does say, she tells me the truth.
She calls a spade a spade. That's amazing. We need her to read our books and tell us whether they're shite.
I'm not sure I could take that, quite frankly.
No, she's brilliant. And more than that, Tracy gives me some fantastic ideas for books and helps, I'll edit them and all. So yeah, I'm very lucky. So.
Oh dear. Anyone else, or should we move on? No,
let's go to the next one.
All right, let's have a look down. We've got this is a good one from Erin Mitchell. Abir mentioned Denise Miner. I recently read her Philip Marlowe book, The Second Murderer, and I'm wondering what you all think about authors continuing other authors' series. And if you were to do so, which characters would you like to write?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer, so I'm just going to talk till one comes into my head. I was asked to write a character from the Bond franchise, not Bond, but I was asked to write a series based on one of the other characters. I decided not to for several reasons. One, you don't control the character, you don't control the IP, so you're essentially writing for hire, which is fine. But I suppose it depends what you want from your career and where you are in your career. And also, mind you, there are different characters, right? If it was Bond, I think it would be an honor to write one. Mm-hmm. But to start a franchise over, for another character that you don't control didn't seem right to me. If I was asked if I could write any character, actually, you've written Marple, haven't you, Ruth? Well, yeah, I should stop talking now and you should speak.
Well, I answered the last question, so I was going to keep my mouth shut. But yeah, I've written a Miss Marple short story. I was asked to as part of a collection. And that was amazing. It was great fun. But I think I would find a novel quite tough for lots of the reasons that Abir mentions. But also just, it's quite restrictive working in somebody else's world. You want to do them justice. You want to try and write the way you think they would have handled something, but you don't want to write a pastiche. So I loved writing the Marple story. As a standalone writer, it was just such a treat to have a ready-made world that I could step into, let alone one that I adore so much. She's probably the only person that I would trust myself to, which sounds very hubristic because she's so well loved, but I know those books so well. I sort of felt like I could do it justice as much as anybody could. So,
anyone else?
Well, I'm thinking, will anyone take on my characters when I'm gone? And I'm thinking, if they don't do a good job, I could haunt them.
Would you want them to?
Yeah.
Would you want
I
them
don't know. It's weird, isn't it? I'm not sure. I mean, there's on the one hand, they're keeping your work alive and bringing it to a new generation and, developing it, and they're inspired by it, and that's good. And on the other hand, they might really take it down a route that you'd hate. Yeah. So, yeah, I'd haunt them.
Kia, any IP you fancy having a go at?
Oh, God, I don't know if I would, just because those sorts of books and characters tend to have a massive fan base who can get quite zealous, shall we say, a polite way of putting it. And so I think I kind of see it as putting myself in the firing line. So I'm quite happy writing my own books. And I don't actually know if I'd like somebody to carry on writing my work. I don't think so. I think, once I shuffle off the mortal coil, like my work's done and that's my canon, if that's not too pretentious to say. And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to get shot out of a cannon as well. That's the way I'm going to go too.
Excellent. I should say I have a very little story about this. I did write a short story which appears in an anthology about Moriarty.
Oh, wow.
I learned when I just started the short story that the anthology was not endorsed by the Conan Doyle estate, which gave me some pause. And I don't judge any writer who did anything in that anthology at all. They did whatever they did. I felt a wee bit uncomfortable. So I wrote a Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty short story without Sherlock Holmes or Moriarty being in it. It's still creative. Very much Holmes story. It's a Holmes story and a Moriarty story, but those characters do not appear. So in terms of the Conan Doyle estate, if the other one wanted to pay me a bucket load of money, if Anthony Horowitz ever decides I'm not going to
still available
anymore, somebody could say, well, he did a nice thing once. And he, but there you go. That was quite challenging, but that's my experience of it. So yeah, somebody wants me to write Batman or Bond or anything, no problem.
Yeah, I've written a fair few existing characters when I worked in comics and graphic novels. So you mentioned things like Batman and stuff. I haven't actually written Batman, but I wrote Daredevil and Shang-Chi and characters like that. It is interesting because, as you say, you don't control these characters and you know that you don't control them. So anything you do will be temporary anyway. But
it's a nice toy you get to play with for a while.
Right. Playing in someone else's sandbox is how we refer to it in the comics business. I think we've got time for one more question. And there are a lot of questions like Amy and Laurie and Nay and a whole bunch of other people, Danny Williams, are all asking essentially questions about what tips can you give aspiring writers? Like, you know, what is your one tip that you would give somebody who's looking to write their first book and make it good and make the characters interesting and all that? I think that's a good question to end on, don't you?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Steve, why don't we kick off with you?
Okay, I would say know the genre, know where your place could be in it. Read a lot and write a lot. There's a lot of crime books published every year, and if possible, you find your own voice and your own unique thing that you can bring to it, and I think that will open a lot of doors for you.
Abir.
I would add, don't rush, because people often they on social media, you see people getting agents and book deals and so on, and you think you're lagging behind, but your debut is always going to be your debut. So take your time, spend your time refining it, working on your craft, making sure it's absolutely the best that you can get it before you start sending it off. Don't be tempted to think, oh, well, it's in a decent enough shape, so now I can't wait, I'm going to send it off. Just make sure that if it actually went to print tomorrow, as it stands, you could stand behind that book, because that's how good it needs to be to get an agent's attention.
Very true.
I'm going to say slightly the opposite. Not that I don't agree with what Kia said, because I do. The bar is very high, and your debut novel has to be very good to clear it. But I would say I have two tips. One is give your readers a reason to turn the page, something that they want to find out, something that they're curious about or querying. And in a crime book, that's very easy. It's who did it. But you need lots of small questions. You need, a question in each chapter that people are keen to find out about. But as a sort of counterpoint to Kia's, I would say don't be afraid to fail. I think sometimes people find it really hard to write the first chapter because they feel like it has to be so good. They feel like it has to be perfect and publishable. And the truth is, no book is perfect when you first write it. It takes a lot of thinking about it and whittling and iterations to make it into a publishable book. And the first book that you write might not be the first book that you publish, and that's fine. I've got 12 unpublishable novels in my bottom drawer, and they made me into the writer I am today. So nothing's wasted.
I would say love what you do. Love writing, love the writing process. Always write from a place of joy and positivity. And don't be bogged down with whether you'll be published or not, whether you'll get an agent or not, whether this will happen, that will happen, or the likelihoods. Just love it and enjoy it, because that will come through in your writing.
I've got 2 points. The first one is don't show it to anyone till you've written the whole thing, the first draft. Too often we write something and we think, oh, this is great, I've got to show somebody, I need validation. And you show it to your loved ones, or you show it to friends, and they'll give you an opinion. And it doesn't mean anything, because they're your friends and they're your loved ones. More importantly,
it's Tracy.
Unless it's Tracy. But more importantly, it takes away something. It takes away some of the urgency. For me, anyway, you want to get it out there, but if you've already started showing it to people, some of that drive that you have to keep going, and it's a tough business writing a book, especially if it's your first one. So yeah, don't show it to anyone till it's done. And secondly, I would say, echo some of the other people on the panel, have fun, right? Because if it works, you'll probably be on a treadmill like the rest of us, having to work to deadlines and schedules. This is your chance to experiment. Enjoy it, because you won't get the chance again.
Brilliant. Perfect.
All right.
We are. Is that? Are we going to? We don't have time for any more. Is that us finished?
I think that's it. We're done. Yeah.
We're done.
It's a lovely note to end on, wasn't it? All of us talking about, having joy in our writing.
This has been great fun, and thank you to everyone out there who's sort of been putting in the chats and the comments and the questions.
Yeah, they were great questions, very thought-provoking.
Weren't they?
Excellent questions.
Really good. Thanks for everyone for coming. And please do go out and support these authors. This is the CWA we're celebrating here. We're celebrating their 70th anniversary and a fantastic year for our friend Vasim Khan to be elected chair, which we're all delighted about. So go out and support these authors. Go and buy their books. Get reading. And you can find out more at crimereading.com. And I've been told to say that. And I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. And now I've said it.
And thank you for bringing us all together, Steve. It was such a, very privileged to be here. So
it was a total pleasure. I really enjoy doing these things because I like talking to the crime writers. So it's brilliant. And I've had a lovely time. And I hope to see you all very soon at Harrogate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, officially, semi-officially, as it were, on behalf of the CWA, thank you, Steve, for hosting this. Thank you to Kia, Janice, Abir, and Ruth for coming along, and thank you to everybody for watching. Have a great evening. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Bye.
good night, everyone.
Bye.
Happy reading.